Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at CMMC and an uncomplicated look into what the DoD contractors really need to know right now. I'm Kimberly Glowacki, and I'm the Director of Strategic Growth here at IP Consulting, and I'll be your host today. A couple of quick reminders before we dive in. The session's going to run about 45 minutes, and we're going to try to save some time at the end for Q&A. So please feel free to drop your questions into the chat at any time, and we'll tackle as many of those questions as we can. With me today, I have our president and passionate business expert on CMMC, Sherry Mosey. Sherry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Kimberly. I always enjoy talking about CMMC because it really affects so many of the contractors that we serve. And honestly, the pace of change keeps this conversation interesting every time we have it. So this is one of the biggest shifts that's happened in federal contracting in years, and we're all feeling the pressure together.
I hear you there. The pressure certainly is kind of culminating on all of the CMMC information, and there's so much of it. So let's just go ahead and start at the top. The acronym soup alone can feel a bit overwhelming, and I do want to dig into that. But before we jump into the word jumble, I want to talk about some other things. Give us why is CMMC happening? That level set, what problem are we trying to solve?
Well, at its core, CMMC is about protecting, sorry, here's an acronym for you, CUI, which means Controlled Unclassified Information, and another one, FCI, which is Federal Contract Information. So those two classifications of data across the whole, what's called defense industrial base, which really means anyone that's doing work for or on behalf of the Department of Defense. The government is essentially seeking to ensure that organizations that have sensitive data in their system treat it with the appropriate level of care, custody, and control. This, I would say, though, it's had years of inconsistent definition and implementation. So CMMC can be looked at as a good thing, even though it's hard to see it that way sometimes. And it's really a formal codification of some of those standards that have been in place. The unfortunate news, though, is that small contractors are getting hit a little bit harder than the larger ones because it's harder to find the money to spend on this type of thing. And also, just the realization that small companies are sometimes the entry point for the bad guys. So this is definitely a critical topic for us all.
I want to key in on that a little bit. I heard you talk about, those small and medium contractors. And I was a little bit surprised to learn as I was preparing for this interview that many of the DoD contractors really are those small to medium businesses like IP Consulting. And I don't know why I thought they were going to be like the big guys like the Lockheed Martins and the Boeings and the Northrop Grumman, all the folks that, are big players there. But I mean, I know that small to medium business is where so much of the U.S. runs, but that really surprised me.
I didn't anticipate the number question. So I don't have the actual numbers at my fingertips, but I can tell you that the smalls make up the lion's share of DoD contractors. So empowering businesses that look and feel like ours is what lights that fire of passion for me.
Well, I'm glad to hear you say I'm going to harness some of that passion.
Yeah. Sorry, I'm losing my voice a little, so I don't mean to fade out on you.
No worries. I'm gonna stay on the passion side. I'm gonna harness that a little bit because I'm gonna need a little bit of inspiration from you. And this is where we'll kind of talk about that piece. I tiptoed. It's the vocabulary. I heard you talk about CUI and FCI, and I know there's NIST and DFARS and SPRS and POAMs, but I'm getting lost in so much of this alphabet soup. I mean, how do contractors, how should they make sense of all of this?
I like to joke that I've learned military as a second language. And if you speak military at all, you know that you're getting into acronyms. So I think we have a slide maybe with some of those key terms. This will help. I think we have something that we can send out later, but I think we'll go over just a few of the most common and the most impactful. So I suppose starting at the top, which is what is CMMC? That's the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. And this is the assessment framework and program to measure compliance to those NIST standards that are applicable to handling sensitive data. A couple terms I've already mentioned, I'll mention again. CUI, that's that controlled unclassified information. That means that it's non-public, but it's sensitive and requires safeguarding. FCI, which is the federal contract information, that's that basic data in your contract. Again, it's not intended for public release and needs to be secured. Another one that you'll hear a lot is DFARS or DFARS, DFARS. That's that regulation, the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation Supplement. Not easy to say fast. And that's the set of regulations that supplement the primary federal regulation or FAR. And it's really that code that regulates the contracts with the Department of Defense. And it's the rule that requires contractors to follow NIST. If you're looking at what is the rule, that's where you'd want to go and search for that one. NIST 800-171. That's a common standard that's been published by the National Institute of Standards and Technology. That agency is the agency that sets the guidelines that define how non-federal organizations must protect that CUI and the FCI. And that's the regulation that has the listing and all of the definitions for those 110 controls that we need to have in place if you're going to seek level 2 or above. Another term that's thrown around a lot is SPRS score. And that's one of the ones that doesn't actually get an actual word with it. We just say SPRS. It's that self-scored cybersecurity readiness, and that has to be posted to the DoD Supplier Performance Risk System. And your SPRS score is basically your cybersecurity credit score, if you will. And that's one that we need to keep active all the time, and I think we'll speak on that later. One acronym that does get a word is POAM or POANM, POAM. And that's your document, that's your roadmap that says, where am I and where do I need to go so that we are in compliance with all of those regulations that we need to meet. And your POAM is your guidelines. And there's some strict regulations and limits around that POAM as well. Probably talk about later, maybe. I already mentioned this CMMC scoping. Let's see, that's an important one because before you do anything else, as you approach your compliance requirements, you need to define your scope. And in this sense, the scope is what systems touch CUI. So if you get your scope wrong, you're either going to increase your regulation or your assessor is going to come in and discover something and then you'll miss an assessment because we didn't get that piece right. That's the foundation. And what we need to do here is identify which information systems actually will store, process, or transmit that FCI or CUI. And those information systems are what's going to control the scope of the assessment. Couple more, I'm almost done for now. C3PAO, that's your certified third-party assessor. That's that organization that comes in from the outside that gets hired to actually perform the assessment. And last but certainly not least is GRC, which is Governance, Risk Management, and Compliance. So that's an umbrella term that is important because that integrates everything in your organization, all your risk and all your compliance. So your HR department, your accounting department, your technology department need to work together to organize and comply with your whole governance and risk management program. Is that enough for now?
This is Sherry. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. This is a lot of information, but I know we're just scratching the surface with some of those. I've heard some other acronyms thrown around. I keep saying I'm gonna have to get a secret decoder ring, the ones you used to get in the cereal box.
Absolutely. Great idea.
All right.
There's actually so many more as well. I think we have a whole glossary that we can send out later if someone wants to, get, light reading.
Oh, I'll get with my team and we'll do that as a follow-up. So we'll include that in our takeaways for everyone. So let's go ahead and pivot here a little bit. And I'd like to ask you to talk a little bit to the timeline.
Mm.
So I know that that's kind of a moving target or has been a moving target in the past. What do contractors actually need to know about when CMMC is going to start showing up in contracts?
Well, the short answer is actually now. If you're waiting, it's too late. It actually came into official codification November 10th of 2025. So it's now. And even if it's not showing up in your RFPs that you encountered yet, it's going to happen soon. And so we recommend that organizations start operating as if you're going to be audited in your next fiscal year. Although the longer answer, and thank you for sharing this, spread information, I think at a glance, um, the roadmap that the Department of Defense has put together as they completed that rulemaking. And then there is an initial adoption phase with selected contracts, the ramp up phase where more contracts are going to start seeing it, and then the ultimate full enforcement will come soon. And so, our advice is you should start expecting to see it sooner than you think you might.
So it's here. It's the here and now. And I heard you talking also. Isn't there another change that's coming?
Yes, as if this wasn't enough. So that I mentioned that NIST 800-171,
Yeah.
uh, there's been a few revisions. So we're currently operating on revision 3, revision 2. Revision 3 has been announced. It's in circulation right now, receiving feedback. From the word on the street is that we should start seeing revision 3 as early as this summer. And there's going to be some incorporated new terms and conditions, and most notably a new scoring methodology. So the increase in scope on the advanced threat protection is one of the things we're expecting to see. And the key thing with this revision is the assessors. It's going to be new to them. It's going to be new to us, and we want to try to get through an eye on today with an eye on tomorrow as well, because things are always changing.
Yeah, that's the one thing we know we can't escape. We can never escape change. So, I mean, I guess we should have expected that there would be these modifications, especially as they refine that. But, talking about those changes, I wanted to share something and get your thoughts on this. Again, as I'm preparing for this interview, I want to come in with good questions to ask. And, you talked about the timing of this and the timing being now, but I ran across a couple of things. This is notifications that have come out, a couple of letters from Northrop Grumman and also from Boeing to some of their subcontractors. But I thought this was really interesting to read, and I'll read it because I don't know how well this is showing up. But neither contracting officers nor prime contractors may waive or deviate from the CMMC cybersecurity control and assessment requirements. Contracting officers may not award contracts to non-compliant contractors, and those prime contractors may not award purchase orders to non-compliant subcontractors. We encourage you to proactively prepare to comply with this future contractual requirement. This is real. It feels like strong verbiage, but I kind of want to get your take on this.
I love that you're sharing this with the group because, yeah, you can see there's no wiggle room here. We're expecting to see more of this language and this verbiage, and it's a black line, not a gray line. Once CMMC is mandated, and it's mandated by the federal government, once that has been done, there's no room to work around it. We just have to comply.
I think that's really good information, and I can feel that sense of urgency. So beyond the obvious that contractors may lose that opportunity to be eligible either from the prime or from direct DoD awards, what else is at risk for the organizations that don't have their cybersecurity posture buttoned up just yet?
Oh, great question. So let's see. CMMC is really the codification of all of those cybersecurity requirements that have been around for a long time. I think it was like 2002 when they started talking about this. Um, so one of the biggest risks is not just losing out on one contract, but it's really if you've built your business model around working with the Department of Defense, you might be in jeopardy of really losing a full revenue stream because we just talked through that verbiage. It's very clear and pretty unbendable. So prime contractors are starting to put that into their subcontracts. Um, and we mentioned earlier that this was a even before CMMC was formal, these types of regulations have been around. So getting back to CMMC specifically though, um, some of the risks if you don't comply would be, like I said earlier, you won't be eligible maybe to compete now. You might not be able to recompete if your current contract goes out because they could modify the language or requirements. And you might not even be eligible for additional option years because the government could come back on that contract. Um, there's always that False Claims Act exposure if you misrepresent your readiness or your compliance. Level one is your self-assessment. So, I've heard a horror story recently of an organization that misrepresented their self-assessment score, and they got into some heavy-duty trouble and fines. Um, and as you just shared, right, your prime contractors are going to start looking over your shoulder more. With
Yeah, and I
prime
think that was
contractors, they always have options, and they don't wanna lose their contract.
sorry, I feel like I stepped on you there just a little bit. So you were saying about the primes. I think that's a big point.
Yes, they have options, and, we wanna make sure we and our clients are option one, so you wanna put anything in their way.
Yeah, and this was, like I said, probably the big thing for me seeing that is that if these large companies are coming out with this, I'm sure that some of the medium-sized primes are going to be coming out with something very similar. But and I think the concern about how detrimental this can be to those small and medium businesses is important for us to camp on. And we'll talk about that. We talked about the vocabulary. We talked a little bit about what's at risk. I'd like to get into that structure. And you just kind of talked about, the different levels of CMMC. Would you mind walking me through level one, level two, and level three?
Absolutely. I think we might have a slide for that to help the team. Awesome, thank you. So yes, 3 levels. Level 1 is your foundational, and that kicks in if you have FCI, so that um, the contract information. So there's about 15, not about, there are 15 basic cyber practices, and it requires that annual self-assessment and that publish of that SPRS score. Level 2 is what the bulk of us are dealing with now around CUI, and that's got the most press and the most, churn because that's what the regulations are hitting right now. And that's that NIST 800-171 Rev 2 that we talked about, all of those 110 controls, and that's the level that we're gonna have to look to hiring that third-party assessor, that C3PAO. Level 3, those are those high value government programs, probably requiring some secret clearance already. And those assessments are going to be led by the government. In addition to the NIST 800-171, there's NIST 800-172 that have an additional 35 security requirements. Um, I will say most contractors are going to fall at level 1 or level 2, but a surprising amount of our small contractors are realizing that they're going to be pushed into level 2, even though they didn't think they would. Because if you handle even one piece of CUI, the government's likely going to ask you to become compliant with level 2, and this is that area that we don't wanna gamble in.
Listen, I'm hearing you. 15 cyber practices, 110 controls, 35 security requirements. You're trying to put numbers into my alphabet soup as if it wasn't complex enough.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's a lot. And you might kind of be answering this question a little bit, but I'd like you to dig in. How do I know if I'm a DoD contractor? How do I know what level? I'm hearing a lot of people being pushed into level 2, and the importance of, if I have CUI, I know I've got to be in level 2, but how do I know where I'm supposed to be compliant?
The good news is your contract is gonna tell you what level you need. So, the government is going to identify what, if any, controlled CUI you have, in your scope. So that's the good news. However, one of the biggest mistakes that we see contractors making is assuming that they're level 1 because they don't think they have CUI. Only the government gets to decide whether you have CUI. A big caveat here, though, is your prime contractor, as we just saw from, the slide you shared earlier, your prime contractor could ask for some tighter controls of level 2 if they think that it helps them with their risk mitigation. So you might not be under contract compliance, but your primes might be giving you pressure to reach level 2.
Yeah, and that last line that was in the Northrop Grumman, the last line there was, get prepared, get proactive. So I think this is great. I want to explore a little bit on, how do you see that CMMC journey kind of playing out? What does it look like? What are kind of the different steps or stages?
I love you're asking this. Okay. So, CMMC, big elephant. We try to break that down into 6 different phases. So, the first thing that we do is we want to assess where we currently are. So we conduct what we call a gap assessment. We evaluate your current posture, and then we help calculate your SPRS score, that Supplier Performance Risk Management Risk System score for you. And then from that honest evaluation, that honest assessment, then we help create a remediation and documentation. That's the next phase. So in that phase, we're going to look at how do we close those gaps that were identified in your assessment. Um, how do we look at your policies, your procedures, your documents, your system security plan, or your SSP, sorry, another acronym. And then the outcome of that remediation plan is your plan of action and milestone. And excuse me, I should have mentioned earlier, an outcome of your assessment is that plan of action and milestone. Your remediation phase is where we actually work on it to get all of those things remediated. So now you're good. And then we go into actually preparing for that assessment. So here's where we say, okay, we're good. Now we have to prove that we're good. We're gathering up all of that evidence. We're populating our tool. We highly recommend using a tool. You can use a spreadsheet, but mentioned before 110 controls, and there's a whole lot of evidence that you're going to need to organize around being prepared for that assessment. And this is the phase where we also encourage really fine tuning and picking the right C3PAO. Um, this is that company that's going to walk you through your assessment. So choosing them and then getting on their schedule, which is getting fuller and fuller these days, is an important step. Fourth step, we're going to go in and verify with you. We'll go through, we'll make sure that all that remediation work, all that preparation work is ready to go. We're going to conduct that self-assessment, or sometimes you'll even want to hire that C3PO to do a pre-assessment, because once they come in to do the actual certification, that's public record. So if they find gaps that we weren't prepared for, that goes on record. So we want to avoid that at all costs, right? So that's that verification phase. And then fifth phase is your celebration. Yes, we'll jump right into celebrating because you're going to get certified. You're going to have that C3PAO come in. They're going to conduct that assessment, and And here's a little secret that we offer is, you know, we serve as what we call an RPO. We come alongside of you to help you with all of that assessment, all that pre-work, and then we also sit in that seat with you when that assessor's there, kind of looking at you like a judge over his eyes, over this, and looking at all of that evidence that you worked so hard to create because he's trying to find a flaw in it, and we can sit in that seat with you. So we're the we're like your attorney on your side as you're getting assessed. Um, Celebrate, "Woo, we made it." Unfortunately, that just means we're ready to, continue on. We've worked so hard to get into this certified state. We wanna make sure we stay there. And, even after we get level 2 certified, there's an annual assessment, self-assessment that needs to be done, and then, every 3 years, we have to bring that C3PO back in. So that's a continued compliance. It sounds like a lot, Kim.
It does. It does. The nice thing is, I mean, it's an ongoing journey, right? So it sounds like, there's a lot of pieces to it, but it's not a stop and start.
No, for sure, it's not. Like I said, we have all that effort that's gone into getting where we are, so, it's definitely not a one and done, and, once you make that investment, you're definitely gonna wanna keep it.
No, absolutely. And I'm gonna break us away. Hopefully this meshes up well, but I had a question come in and I think it's really timely, so it might be good to answer it. And specifically, here's the question for you, Sherry. What type of organization would be best to assist in getting certified? Since we're just talking about the journey, I thought that might be a good opportunity for you to let us know.
Thank you from the audience for that question, that's a great question. Let's see. Well, IP Consulting, we sit in a couple different seats, and we see the attainment of this certification as kind of a team. So I mentioned RPO. That's someone who's really skilled in understanding all of the compliance language, all of the things that need to be met. And that's where we can sit in a seat of security understanding, compliance authority. Um, the other role is your technical role. So you might have an internal technical team or a managed service provider. And both of those teams really are important. If you use an external managed service provider, they could actually get pulled into scope for your CMMC, which I think we probably don't have time to talk about today, but I will mention that there's definitely, if your current MSP doesn't know the difference between FCI and CUI without Googling it, you should probably worry.
Yeah,
Um,
right.
our our team, our RPO team, we mentioned that gap assessment. We can help you perform that and create that tactical POAM. A good partner is also going to help you evaluate your vendor partners. Do they have the appropriate security and compliance standards in place? They're going to help you understand that specific requirements in the journey, that making sure that we all align to that NIST 800 171 R2 or R3 depending on timeline. Um, you want somebody that's going to help you collect that evidence and ensure that the evidence you're collecting is the evidence that the assessor is going to be happy with. And we staying on pace with all the things that are changing is, you want somebody that's going to be able to look ahead, not just behind. So a few years ago we faced the hard reality that if we wanted to be partnering and helping these clients see the value and the value of compliance and working with the different areas in the government, we made some investments, so that we could provide that level of guidance. And I'm confident that if we hadn't taken those steps over 3 years ago, there's no way I would be here being able to have this discussion. There's so much to learn. But because of our investment in that time, we feel strongly that we're able to help our clients avoid some common mistakes in their scope or the solution sets and be efficient during this journey.
And thank you, Sherry, really for caring enough about partnerships, especially with those small to medium businesses, to have made those kind of investments. one of them, and I want to, I joke around about the alphabet soup, but RPO is one I don't know that we really talked much about, but RPO is that registered provider organization, and it really just means an authorized partner, from the cyber AB ecosystem. So that's really kind of the interesting piece there, is that there's a lot that you had to go through to get that. So I'm guessing you and your team have seen some interesting things along the way, working with DoD contractors. Any problems or areas of concerns that you can share with us?
Oh my, we could be here all day, but I'll try to bring it together. So yes, I'm glad you asked that. Um, Problem areas are, oh, common categories. I think, I'll start with the largest thing that we see a lot of folks struggling with. It's really the navigation and understanding the expectation of that C3PO, your third party assessor. It's really difficult for your internal IT team or even your managed service provider who may have never gone through that third party assessment to know what that assessor is going to be looking for. The requirements from CMMC are written to be very vendor agnostic and technology agnostic, which makes them a little bit cryptic, and it's hard to understand sometimes. Am I compliant or am I not? And we've seen organizations that either over prepare, overbuy, or unfortunately under prepare and underbuy. So, someone that really understands that compliance and understands what that assessor is going to look for. Um, some other bullet points maybe for some gaps or common areas would be, technical. We all know that the technical gaps are probably out there, and there's a lot of them. A lot of requirements, that is. Documentation, here's a common area. Back to that alphabet soup, there's a lot of the system security plan. A common page length for that plan is around 150 to 200 plus pages, and that's not easy to read, let alone write. Um, so and that system security plan outlines what your processes and your governances are. And if you haven't spent enough time in that, there's going to be some gaps there. And just oversight of all of your vendors, all of your subcontractors, identifying what that scope is. And unfortunately, the budget expectations can be a gap. It's not a light lift to get from not being compliant to a level 2 compliant. So, there's a lot of unrealistic expectations that we've seen along how long it's going to take to be ready and how long it's going to take to just gather the evidence. Um, we've often seen a lot of those policies, and they kind of come off the shelf. There's a lot of templates out there, and maybe we've done a find and replace and updated it, and we think that that's good, and those policies maybe were implemented but never revisited or not used day in the life. Um, One that I'm passionate about, as right, the project management, getting all of these people and things and processes organized, and just having the right team in place for that piece of it. And sometimes I think I'll just summarize by saying you don't know what you don't know, right? If you haven't been through this process before, the clients that we work with, they're clearly skilled in their trade, but they don't understand. I wouldn't expect anybody to invest or want to sign up to read the DFARS, right? That's hard. I'll be sure to put you to sleep, right? But a lot of contractors are failing in this space because not because they don't care, but they just don't know what that proof is. So probably
Yeah,
more
I
than
can I
bullet
can
points. I
agree with
had
that. Yeah, I can agree with that. I was talking with someone from our team. They're talking about the evidence collection. I had to pick my jaw up off the floor, and they said it can be up to like 1,500 pieces of evidence, and I'm like, wow, yeah, I definitely wouldn't want that in a spreadsheet, and I wouldn't want to have to be responsible for collecting that and not even knowing where am I supposed to go collect that from.
for sure.
So yeah, I heard you mention process and documentation, and I'm going to tap into your personal expertise because I know that you're an active and passionate project management professional, and I know that that's a big piece as we talk about those collecting the evidence and keeping everything coordinated. Can you give us a little a little bit of an understanding on, you've mentioned that this is a large scale project to me in the past, and what role can that project manager play in the life cycle that you mentioned a little bit earlier?
Yes. Well, if you know me for 5 minutes, you know I was probably born a project manager. Um, I've been employed as one for over 25 years. We'll just leave it there, over 25. And I can definitely say CMMC is a large scale project. Um, yeah, large.
So yeah, let's kind of unpack that a little bit. What makes it a large scale project?
Um, well, the strategic requirements, right? We mentioned earlier that CMMC might be attaining a CMMC level 2 might be a strategic requirement for an organization to even stay in business. So that means it's a high profile, high stake strategic initiative. Where failing it means you could lose a significant source of your revenue. You know, underneath that umbrella, it's complex. I mentioned earlier, right? It's all of your departments have to come together. It's not just your IT department, it's everybody. And this is something that's hard to do alone. If you've never done it before, it's complex. There's a lot of communication that needs to happen with your internal team, your external partners, your vendor, your assessing body. All of those project plans are going to be detailed. There's going to be some dependencies. We need to make sure that we're implementing the right things in the right order. You don't want to go pull evidence and then have something change and then you have to go get that evidence again. So orchestrating all of those different initiatives, and that's where a project management professional, or a lot of folks in this discipline can have that organizational skill. So translating those requirements into actionable tasks, um, how to assign the ownership, right? If everybody owns it, nobody owns it. So putting into place those right expectations, um, coordinating all of these initiatives, managing all of those artifacts, like you said, all of those 1,500, and mapping them back into your system security plan, into your POAM, into your repository. Um, Even things like scheduling your mock assessment and your audits and validating and as we mentioned earlier, right? Once you've put all of that effort in, your project management team can actually help you make sure that it's organized in a way that's sustainable, so that it's not just, "Ooh, we got through and we're checked and we're, skin of our teeth, we got through, yay." But if we approach this properly, maintaining all of that is going to be easier in the long haul.
And Sherry, I'm looking at the time here, and I got a few more questions. I want to make sure that we get in here before we grab some of these great questions that are coming through. So I know that project management is really essential in that overall journey, but and I know that it can be really overwhelming for those smaller teams. And so my question is, where do they start first? Right? We've
Oh,
talked about that kind of journey. I've still got it up there on the screen, but what's the first step?
well, I love this question. So, these organizations, they're balancing your day-to-day responsibilities of running your business, so it can feel really overwhelming. So, revisiting that framework. How do you eat the elephant one bite at a time? You start with that gap assessment. You get an honest evaluation of where you're currently at and not a guess, right? You put that detailed plan in place for how are you going to get remediated. You identify and really commit to your evidence gathering tool. Yes, you can use Excel. Highly recommended tool. We've seen organizations do it both ways, and trust me, the tool makes it so much more easy and efficient, and it's worth the investment. Um, you're going to want to conduct that mock assessment, making sure that you're ready to get into that final assessment, and then go into your assessment with confidence. Once you're sure, go ahead and get that scheduled.
And so I know that I've heard in the past, you've kind of said, and I see you have gap on here, assess the gaps, is beginning with a actual gap assessment.
Yes, yes. So, we conduct an assessment that's not just your technical stack. It has to include that, of course, but we look at your policies, your documentation, we look at your score, we put that POAM into place and do a full analysis of where you're at in the full roadmap so we know clearly what needs to be done. And how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost.
One of the other things I thought was really interesting is there's a couple of things that get defined in that gap assessment that really are requirements for CMMC certification anyway. So it really is kind of getting the whole plan started. So I love that, and I love the framework, and I'm just going to leave that up. I hope that's okay, because I think that's just a really easy way, at least for me, to kind of wrap my head around it. But I want to talk about where the RPO managed service, we have these folks. Where does your team click in across this entire journey?
Oh, good question. We click in really where our clients need us, right? So we're positioned and prepared to help in the entire journey. And our approach is to really help guide our clients through each phase of the process and help them with as many resources as they need. So, they might have some internal IT staff that's very capable and can do many of those remediation efforts themselves. So we then become that guide. um, Here we're not looking for just a transaction. We don't just do an assessment and leave you alone with the POAM, right? We're here for the whole life cycle and a partnership so that we can make that lasting impact and that continuous compliance becomes easy.
And sure, I just love the idea that you don't have to go it alone with all the complexities that are out there. And so I think that's awesome. And I'd love for us to be able to jump into a case study, but I did promise to get some questions answered here. So I'm gonna keep you on that passionate talk track and fired up, hopefully, to tackle a couple of these questions. So the first one that I have here, it says, what do you estimate the costs are for CMMC certification?
Oh, wow. There have been announcements, from too low to too high. So you're going to see a wide range. I can speak to what average we've seen. So the average, to go from zero to compliance, we recommend budgeting around $150,000. That incorporates all of your time, your people, your implementing that security, conducting those remediations, working with the various partners like us, putting those tools in place. And, that C3PAO assessment, we've been talking about that in and of itself runs around $50,000, give or take. So it's it's not
It's an
inexpensive.
investment.
It is an investment.
No, I like that. I think I have time for one more question. I've got a couple other ones here that are really good, but this looks like somebody who might have missed maybe the first portion. It says, what's the advantage to starting now? So we'll send some of those follow-up documents, but I know this is something you could speak on all day long.
Oh my goodness. Yes, I could speak on. The advantage of starting now is, well, I'll say, when's the best time to plant a tree? 10 years ago. When's the second best time? Today. You know that it's coming. You know that it's going to take some time. You want to avoid rework. So getting ahead of it, picking your partners, getting your team organized so it doesn't become a fire drill. That's the summary value of doing it now.
Also, you're talking about, the picking your partners. Last time I checked, I think there was only 81 of those C3PAOs. So as people are getting more and more serious about the CMMC, I think you're going to start to see some of those bottlenecks, which are going to push you out even further. So even when you are ready, they're not ready for you. So I think
Yeah.
that's something, yeah, we're going to have to take into account when we talk about timing. But Sherry, we're right here at about 45 minutes, and this has been great. And I just want to thank you for tackling the conversation, but I want to give you the final word before I wrap up the session.
You know, I think I wanna say don't be afraid of the journey, right? It's an investment. Go in with your eyes wide open, but don't be afraid of the journey. You know, I'd love for someone to select us as their partner, but there's really good partners out there, and they can help you navigate through these waters. We can help you navigate through those waters. You're gonna wanna find somebody that's gonna work with you side by side. You're gonna want somebody to be honest with you. You know, you don't want the assessor to tell you something doesn't comply before your partner did. And you're gonna want someone that's gonna stick with you throughout the journey. And I genuinely think that we're the best partner out there, and I hope we can be it. But you know, there are good ones, so don't be afraid. Just get started.
Well said, Sherry. Start today. I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and passion around CMMC compliance. And I'd also like to thank the audience for joining the session today. We'll go ahead and we'll send out that replay link for today's session, as well as the acronym glossary we mentioned. We'll get the timeline out too. And we even have a link for a free readiness questionnaire. And so I'd love to continue the conversation with you, as would Sherry. No matter where you are in your journey, if you have additional questions, please do go to our website and start a conversation with our team. And finally, on behalf of IP Consulting, thank you all for joining us. Please enjoy the rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.